That prenup you signed means you leave with exactly what you brought, Aaron. And that was nothing at all. Marcus's laugh bounced off the marble walls of the courthouse hall, his arm casually slung around his pregnant mistress. He was sure he had won. He saw the quiet woman in the worn-out coat shivering before him and assumed she was broken, but he never bothered to check the visitor log. He had no idea that the black SUV pulling up to the curb was not a car service, but a vehicle from the Sterling Group's greatest rival. Marcus was about to find out that being quiet does not mean you are weak. This is a story for every woman who has ever been underestimated, silenced, or thrown away like she was nothing. Stay until the end, because the moment of justice in this story will make your heart pound. It was the kind of calm that comes right before a hurricane. The Seattle rain usually felt like a simple warning, but on this particular Tuesday night, it felt like a final judgment. Aaron gazed out the massive window of the penthouse on the 42nd floor, watching the storm blur the city lights below. In the vast, cold living room behind her, the sharp sound of a zipper being pulled shut was the only thing that broke the silence. "Are you paying any attention to me?" Marcus's voice was like a jagged blade, one that had been chipping away at her confidence for 3 long years. Aaron turned around slowly. Her husband, Marcus Vance, was standing near the door with a leather suitcase by his feet. It was not his suitcase. It was hers. It was the same old, beaten-up luggage she had arrived with 3 years ago. "I heard you, Marcus," she replied quietly. Her voice was surprisingly firm, even though her hands were shaking inside her sweater pockets. "You want me to leave?" "I don't just want you out, Aaron. I am throwing you out. Tonight." Marcus glanced at his Rolex, a platinum watch she knew was worth more than her father's entire retirement fund. "Lydia is moving in first thing in the morning. I don't want her dealing with your mess. It will be bad for the baby's aura." Hearing Lydia's name felt like a spike of ice driving into Aaron's heart. Lydia was not just some other woman. She was the personal assistant to Marcus. A woman Aaron had once made dinner for. A woman Aaron had sincerely thanked for arranging Marcus's schedule so he could be home for their anniversary. That was the same anniversary he spent secretly texting Lydia under the table. "She is pregnant," Aaron said, making it a statement, not a question. She had heard the whispers from the doorman and the housekeepers for weeks, noticing the pity in their eyes. 4 months along, Marcus said with a smirk, straightening his silk tie, "and it is a boy, an heir. Something you obviously were not able to give me." That was the cruelest cut of all. Marcus was well aware of the health issues, the private appointments with Dr. Henderson, and the nights she spent crying in the guest bathroom. He knew that she desperately wanted a child. "We have a rental agreement, Marcus. My name is on the security access list." Aaron tried to find some logic in the situation. Even though she knew it was pointless, Marcus let out a short, harsh laugh. He walked to the coffee table and grabbed a large envelope. He threw it directly at her. The envelope hit her in the chest before dropping to the carpet. "Inside you will find the divorce papers and a copy of the prenuptial agreement you signed. Article 4, Section 2. It states that if there is infidelity, or if the marriage ends because the higher-earning spouse finds it incompatible, the other spouse gives up all rights to financial support, property, and any shared assets." Aaron stared down at the documents. "I was never unfaithful to you." "That does not matter," Marcus sneered, stepping so close that he towered over her. "I have very aggressive attorneys, Aaron. My lawyer is Silas Thorne. Have you heard of his hourly rate? It is more than you made in an entire year as a librarian. If you decide to fight me on this, I will drown you in legal bills until you are begging to live in a cardboard box." Just sign the papers, take your things, and get out. He then kicked her suitcase in her direction. She looked at the man she once loved. She recalled the charming man she had met 3 years prior, the down-to-earth architect who claimed to admire her quiet mind. It was all an act. He only married her because she was unassuming, a nobody from a small town who would not get in his way as he built his corporate empire, or so he had assumed. "You're making a terrible mistake, Marcus," Erin said, her voice barely a whisper. "The only mistake I ever made was believing you could belong in my world," he shot back. "You are boring, Erin. You have no powerful friends, no drive, and no class. Lydia, on the other hand, fits my brand. You were only ever a temporary placeholder." The elevator chimed as its private doors slid open, revealing 2 security guards she knew by name. They both stared at the ground, refusing to look at her. "Get Mrs. Vance out of here," Marcus ordered. He then turned his back on her to pour a glass of scotch. "And make sure you take her keycard." "Mr. Vance, it is pouring rain out there," one of the guards, a kind man named Jerry, said quietly. "That is not my concern, Jerry. Either do your job, or I will hire someone who can." Erin held up her hand, stopping Jerry before he could take her arm. "It is all right, Jerry. I can walk on my own." She leaned down to pick up the envelope and her suitcase. She left all her clothes behind. She left the jewelry he had given her to wear for publicity photos. She did not take the tablet or any of the credit cards. She only took the one suitcase she had arrived with. When she got to the elevator, she stopped and turned to look at Marcus one last time. He was sipping his drink, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. "Marcus," she said. He did not bother to turn. "Goodbye, Erin." "I truly hope you remember this evening," she said, her voice strangely calm. "I hope you never forget what it feels like to be this powerful." The elevator ride down took 40 seconds. As Erin walked out of the Obsidian Tower's lobby, the cold wind hit her like a slap. The rain was coming down in sheets. She did not have an umbrella. She pulled her suitcase across the soaked pavement of 4th Avenue. She had only $63 in her wallet. Her private bank account was empty. Marcus had access to it and had probably frozen her funds as a legal tactic, a common trick to prevent her from affording a lawyer. She walked for 2 blocks, the water soaking completely through her shoes, until she found shelter under the awning of a closed coffee shop. She shivered and pulled her coat around her more tightly. People walking by paid her no attention. She was just another sad sight in the rainy city. But Erin was not shedding any tears. She reached inside her suitcase and tore open a hidden seam she had sewn into the lining years before. Her fingers found a small, hard plastic object. It was a disposable phone, along with a little notebook that had just one phone number written on the first page. She had sworn to herself she would never use this number. She had walked away from that other life 10 years ago to have a simple, normal existence, far from the public eye, the expectations, and him. She had wanted someone to love her for who she was, not for her family name. Marcus had fallen for Erin, the librarian, but he had also broken her. Now he was about to be introduced to Erin Vanderquilt. She turned on the old phone. The battery was almost dead. With fingers that were numb from the cold, she dialed the number. The phone rang one time, then a second. "This is a secure line," a deep, businesslike voice said. "State your name." Erin drew a deep breath, taking in the city smell of rain and car fumes. "It is me, Julian," she whispered. A deep silence followed on the other end, so quiet she thought the call might have been dropped. Then she heard a chair scraping loudly, a sign of sudden, urgent movement. "Elle?" The voice was suddenly strained, all of its professional coldness gone. "Erin, is that really you? My goodness, we have been searching for you." Where have you been? I am in Seattle, she answered, her voice finally cracking as the shock began to fade. I messed up, Julian. You were right about him. You were right about all of it. Are you in a safe place? His voice was now sharp and commanding. It was the tone of a person who leads armies, or in his case, a massive global company. No, she confessed, glancing at a homeless man who was staring at her suitcase from a few feet away. I am on the street. He threw me out. He took everything from me. Who did this? The single word was a low growl. My husband, Marcus Vance. Vance. Julian said the name as if it were poison. The architect. The one who builds those tacky mid-rise buildings downtown. Yes. Do not move from where you are. Send me your location right now. Julian, I do not want to come back into the family business. All I need is a lawyer. A really good one. You do not need a lawyer, Elle, Julian replied, and she could hear a car door slam shut on his end of the line, followed by the faint whine of a private jet engine starting up. You need a team of warriors, and you are about to get one. He told me I signed a prenup. He said, I walk away with nothing. Julian let out a dark, chilling laugh that made Marcus's earlier chuckle sound like a child's giggle. He thinks he is playing a simple game of checkers, Elle. He is completely unaware that he just challenged a grandmaster. I am on my way to get you, and may God have mercy on Mr. Vance, because I will not show him any. Erin ended the call. She slid down the side of the coffee shop's brick wall, using her suitcase as a seat. She just watched the rain come down, feeling as if it were washing away the last 3 years of her life. Marcus Vance wanted a wife who was just for show. He thought he was getting rid of a simple librarian, but he had just started a war with the only heir to the Vanderquilt technology fortune, and her brother, known as the most ruthless CEO on the East Coast, was already on his way. The rain had become a solid wall of water when a pair of bright headlights sliced through the night. It was not a single car. It was a convoy of 3 polished black Cadillac Escalades with dark tinted windows, moving in a tight, aggressive line that made the few other cars on the street swerve to get out of their path. They came to a sudden stop right in front of the coffee shop. The door of the first vehicle flew open before it had even finished braking. A man got out. He did not run, despite the pouring rain. He moved with a frightening sense of purpose. He was a tall man, dressed in a custom-tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the coffee shop made in a year. He paid no attention to the puddles that were soaking his expensive Italian shoes. Erin got to her feet, her legs unsteady. Julian Vanderquilt, the chief executive officer of Vanderquilt Industries, a man that Forbes magazine had called the Iceman, crossed the distance between them in just 3 long strides. At that moment, he did not look like a powerful CEO. He looked like a big brother who was ready to set the world on fire for his sister. He wrapped his arms around her in a tight embrace, pressing his face into her drenched, tangled hair. I am here now, he whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion he rarely showed. I have you, Elle. You are safe. He leaned back to grip her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. He took in her reddened eyes, the new hollows in her cheeks, and the cheap, soaking, wet coat. His jaw clenched so tight that a muscle pulsed below his ear. Did he put his hands on you? Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. No, Erin said, brushing rain from her cheeks. He just destroyed me, Julian. He tossed me aside like I was nothing. Julian faced the large men who had emerged from the security convoy. His personal protection team. Get her luggage. She rides with me in the center vehicle. Contact the pilot and inform him our departure is postponed. Reserve the entire penthouse floor at the Fairmont Olympic. and get Dr. Orris on the line. I want her examined immediately. Yes, Mr. Vanderquilt. The head of security gave a sharp nod, lifting Aaron's worn-out suitcase with more care than Marcus had ever shown her. Inside the warmth of the sport utility vehicle, enveloped by heated leather and the quiet purr of the engine, Aaron finally let go. She wept for the 3 years built on deception. She wept for the child she could not have, and for the husband who made her carry the blame. She wept for the naive fool she had been, who thought she could leave her family's legacy behind and find a man who loved her for herself, not for her inheritance. Julian sat next to her, holding her hand in silence, allowing her to cry it all out. He offered no empty words of comfort. He simply passed her a silk handkerchief and waited. By the time her tears ran dry, the car was gliding through the streets of Seattle. I told you this would happen, Aaron whispered, staring out the window. 10 years ago, I said I wanted a normal life. I started going by Aaron Vance. Well, it was Aaron Hart before that. I craved a life where people saw me, not a walking bank account. And I honored that wish, Julian said gently. I made the family keep their distance. I let you have that small apartment. I let you take that job at the library. I even had our security team stand down so you would not feel constantly watched. He paused, his hand tightening around hers. But I never stopped reading the background checks. I have known about the mistress, Elle. Aaron snapped her head toward him. You have known for 2 months. I have a file on Lydia Cross that is 3 inches thick. I was waiting for you to realize the truth yourself. My hands were tied by our agreement. But when my security system alerted me that your phone had been turned back on, I knew it was finally over. He reached into the seat pocket in front of him and retrieved a tablet. He tapped the screen and passed it to her. It displayed a live stream of the stock market, zeroed in on the real estate and construction industry. Marcus likes to think he is a major player in Seattle, Julian said, his voice regaining its cold, businesslike edge. He just secured the contract for the new city stadium, did he not? That is what gave him the nerve to discard you today. He believes he is now untouchable. Aaron nodded. He called it his golden opportunity. It is not an opportunity. It is a trap, Julian corrected. He risked everything to win that contract. He has no available cash. He is operating entirely on borrowed money, primarily from Seattle First Bank. Aaron looked over at him, her tired eyes filled with confusion. How could you possibly know all of this? Julian gave a faint, cruel smile. Because, little sister, Vanderquilt Industries finalized the acquisition of Seattle First Bank this afternoon. The transaction was completed 10 minutes before I came to get you. Aaron gasped. You purchased his bank? I purchased his debt, Julian clarified. I own the note on his home. I own his commercial loans. I own the lines of credit he uses to buy jewelry for that mistress. In effect, as of this evening, I own him. The car pulled to a stop in front of the hotel. Doormen hurried to open their doors. So, Julian said as he helped her from the car, we are faced with 2 choices. Option A, I initiate foreclosure proceedings tomorrow, destroy his credit rating, and have him bankrupt by noon. It is quick. It is clean. Aaron stood on the sidewalk, shielded from the rain by an umbrella. A guard held over her. She pictured Marcus's condescending laugh. She pictured him checking his watch as he threw her out. She pictured Lydia in her house, putting her hands on her belongings. No, Aaron said, her voice becoming firm. That is far too simple. He must feel this. He needs to be in a courtroom, believing he is about to win, just so we can see the hope vanish from his eyes. A true grin spread across Julian's face. For the first time all night, he looked genuinely happy. Option B it is, then. a slow, painful burn. Let us get you into a hot shower and have a good meal. Tomorrow, we will go shopping. If you are preparing for war, Aaron, you must dress like a Vanderquilt. 3 days later, Marcus Vance stood in his living room holding a glass of champagne. The rain had finally passed, and the Seattle skyline sparkled. Honey, do you think this gray couch is the right choice? Lydia called from the other room. She had already started redecorating. Aaron's comfortable vintage armchairs were gone, replaced with sharp-angled Italian furniture that looked expensive and unpleasant. Whatever you want, Lyd, Marcus replied, crossing the room to kiss her forehead. You are the woman of the house now. I just want to get all of her negative energy out of here. Lydia pouted, gently touching her small baby bump. Has she signed the divorce agreement yet? She will, Marcus said with a scoff. She is broke, has no family to turn to, and has no place to live. She is likely sleeping in a homeless shelter. She will sign the papers just to get the $5,000 relocation payment I so generously offered. The building intercom buzzed. Mr. Vance? The concierge's voice announced. A delivery for you. Legal documents, Marcus frowned. Have them sent up. A few minutes later, a server handed him a thick envelope of papers. Marcus tore it open, fully expecting to see the signed, uncontested divorce forms. Instead, he saw large, bold letters across the top. Notice of contested divorce and countersuit for damages. He quickly read the document, his face flushing with anger. She is contesting? On what possible grounds? Emotional distress? Fraud? He laughed and tossed the papers onto the new glass coffee table. The woman is delusional. She must have hired some cheap lawyer from a strip mall to try and scare me. He picked up his phone and called Silas Thorne. Silas, my ex-wife is attempting to put up a fight. I saw the electronic filing, Marcus. Silas's voice was calm and bored. It is rather cute. They filed in King County Superior Court. A hearing is scheduled for Friday. An emergency motion for spousal support. Spousal support? Marcus yelled. The prenuptial agreement specifically waives that. That is correct. We will enter the courtroom, present the prenup, and the judge will dismiss her case in less than 10 minutes. It will cost you about an hour of my billable time, but it should be entertaining to see her fail. Do you wish to offer a settlement? Absolutely not, Marcus spat. I want to ruin her. I want her to stand there and hear the judge declare that she is entitled to nothing. Friday at 9 in the morning, then. Be sure to wear the navy suit. It gives off an air of authority. The courtroom had the faint smell of floor polish and old coffee. Marcus was seated at the defendant's table, looking perfect in his navy suit. Lydia sat in the gallery just behind him, dressed in a white dress to highlight her pregnancy, perfectly playing the part of the devoted future wife. Silas Thorne sat beside Marcus, scrolling through emails on a gold-plated tablet. Relax, Marcus. This is just a formality. I just want this to be finished, Marcus grumbled, nervously tapping his foot. At 8:55 in the morning, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Marcus turned around, expecting to see Erin in her usual drab gray cardigan, looking completely terrified. A woman entered. It was Erin, but not the Erin he had ever known. She was dressed in a cream-colored power suit, tailored so perfectly it seemed molded to her. It was stylish, elegant, and projected immense wealth. Her hair, which was usually pulled back into a messy knot, was professionally styled in soft, shining waves. She wore large sunglasses, which she removed with a slow, deliberate motion, revealing eyes that were sharp and determined. But it was her shoes that Lydia noticed from the back row. They had red soles, Louboutins, the very kind Lydia had been asking Marcus to get for her for months. Where did she get the money for that? Marcus whispered to Silas with a frown. She was penniless 3 days ago. Credit cards, most likely, Silas said dismissively. Racking up debt looks terrible during a divorce proceeding. We can use that against her. Erin walked to the plaintiff's table and sat down by herself. She set a single slim file folder on the table before her. She did not glance at Marcus. She did not glance at Lydia. She stared directly at the judge's empty chair. "Where is her attorney?" Marcus sneered. "Did he abandon her already?" "She is representing herself," Silas chuckled. "Pro se." "Oh, this is going to be a complete rout. Judges despise people who represent themselves. They do nothing but waste the court's time." "All rise," the bailiff called out. "The Honorable Judge Kincaid presiding." Judge Kincaid, a serious woman known for having no patience for foolishness, sat down. She looked through her papers. Case number 4921. Vance versus Vance. Let the record show the parties are present. Silas Thorne for the respondent, Marcus Vance. Silas rose, buttoning his jacket with an air of easy confidence. "We are prepared to proceed, Your Honor. We have a motion to dismiss this case based on a signed prenuptial agreement. And for the plaintiff," the judge said, looking toward Erin, "Mrs. Vance, are you acting as your own counsel?" Erin rose to her feet. Her voice was clear and carried to the back of the room. "No, Your Honor. My legal counsel is just now arriving. He was delayed going through security." "Court convenes at 9. Mrs. Vance," the judge said sharply. "If he is not present." The large double doors at the rear of the courtroom flew open with great force. The entire room fell silent. Marching down the center aisle was a formation of 5 lawyers dressed in identical black suits. They moved with perfect military precision, carrying briefcases that resembled weapon containers. At their head was a man whose presence seemed to draw all the air from the room. He was tall and formidable, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He wore a 3-piece suit that made Silas Thorne's expensive attire look like it was purchased from a clearance rack. A cold dread washed over Marcus. He knew that face. Everyone in the business world knew that face. It had been on the cover of Fortune magazine just last month. It was Julian Vanderquilt. He was the billionaire CEO of the Vanderquilt conglomerate, making him one of America's most influential men. Marcus's mind simply could not process it. Why was Julian Vanderquilt standing in this courtroom? Did he somehow purchase the entire building? Julian didn't even pause at the public gallery. He moved directly through the swinging gate, walking right by Marcus and treating him like a piece of furniture until he stood beside Erin. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that conveyed both total protection and undeniable power. "My name is Julian Vanderquilt," he announced, his voice so deep and clear it filled the room without needing a microphone. "I am representing the plaintiff, Erin Vanderquilt." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. Even Judge Kincaid peered over the top of her glasses, her eyebrows shooting up. "Vanderquilt," Marcus breathed out, all the color draining from his face. He shot a look at Silas. Why would he call her Vanderquilt? Silas Thorne had completely forgotten about his email. He was staring at Julian with the expression of a man who just realized he had brought a butter knife to a firefight. His hands were visibly trembling. "Your Honor," Silas stuttered as he got to his feet, his usual slick confidence completely gone. I was not aware that Mr. Vanderquilt held a license to practice law in this state." "I am licensed in New York, London, and Washington State," Julian stated coolly, without even glancing at Silas. He retrieved a document from his briefcase and slid it across the table toward the judge. "My credentials, Your Honor, along with my notice of appearance." Julian then turned slowly to look directly at Marcus. His eyes were cold, lifeless, and utterly terrifying. "And I want to be perfectly clear," Julian added, speaking to the entire room, but keeping his eyes locked on Marcus. "The plaintiff's name is not Vance. She has gone back to using her maiden name. I am quite sure the respondent is familiar with it. Or maybe not." A smile spread across Julian's face, like a shark revealing its teeth. It seems he never took the time to find out who his wife truly was. Marcus sagged back into his chair. He stared at Erin, really studied her this time, and suddenly he could see the family resemblance. The same distinct nose, the same sharp line of her chin. He had not married a nobody. He had married the sole heiress to an empire he could only fantasize about, and he had just tried to throw her out with absolutely nothing. "We are ready to proceed, Your Honor," Julian said. The silence that fell over the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of quiet, typically Scylla, saved for a funeral, or the moment just before a verdict is announced. Silas Thorne, a lawyer who billed $800 an hour and prided himself on his unflappable nature, was now glaring at his iPad as if it had personally betrayed him. He tapped frantically at the screen, searching for any information on Erin Vanderquilt. When the results appeared, his already pale face turned a ghastly shade of white. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Conincade said, her patience clearly wearing thin, "are you prepared to argue against the motion to dismiss?" Silas swallowed with difficulty and loosened his expensive tie. "Yes, Your Honor. We, uh, maintain that the prenuptial agreement, which was signed by Mrs. Vance, my apologies, Ms. Vanderquilt, relinquishes any claim to marital assets. It is a completely standard and unbreakable document." Marcus leaned in close, whispering with fury, "Why do you look so spooked? It is just a name. She is still the same penniless librarian." Julian Vanderquilt remained standing. He stood at the podium, his posture as relaxed as a predator observing its cornered prey. "Your Honor," Julian started, his voice as smooth as silk, but with an edge like a razor blade. "Mr. Thorne calls the prenup standard. It is far from it. It is a cruel, one-sided document created to take advantage of a spouse who is thought to have less power. But we are not here today to debate how fair the prenup is." A smirk appeared on Marcus's face. "Good," he thought. He realizes he has no way to break the contract. "We are here," Julian went on, "to enforce it." Marcus's brow wrinkled in confusion. "Enforce it?" Julian opened a binder made of fine leather. "Article 6, Section B of this agreement specifies that, in the case of a divorce, both individuals will keep full ownership of any assets they had before the marriage, as well as any inheritance they received during it. Is that accurate, Mr. Thorne?" "Yes," Silas answered, sounding puzzled. "That part protects Marcus's company, does it?" Julian smiled. "Because that clause also protects Erin's assets. And seeing as my client is the beneficiary of the Vanderquilt Trust, which was set up for her when she turned 18, her personal net worth at the time she signed this prenup was roughly, let me check." Julian took out a single sheet of paper and made a show of looking at it closely. $450 million. A wave of shock went through the courtroom. A reporter in the back began typing furiously into his phone. Marcus felt lightheaded, as if all the blood had rushed from his head. He gripped the edge of the table. "That is a complete lie," he hissed. "She was a librarian. Her clothes came from thrift stores." "She chooses to live a modest life," Julian said, without looking at Marcus. "Some people do not need to constantly advertise their wealth to feel secure, unlike certain others." Julian turned a page in his binder. "Now, this is where things get particularly interesting for Mr. Vance. The prenup also includes a clause requiring full disclosure of one's financial situation. Both parties swore under oath that they had revealed all of their assets and debts when they signed. If either party was dishonest, the entire agreement can be voided by the wronged party." "I disclosed every single thing," Marcus yelled, jumping to his feet. "Mr. Vance, sit down," Judge Conincade ordered sharply. "Did you really?" Julian asked in a calm voice. He nodded to one of his associates, who then handed a thick pile of documents to the bailiff for the judge and the opposing counsel. 3 years ago, Mr. Vance, you stated that your company, Vance Architecture, was financially sound. You also claimed to own the penthouse at the Obsidian Tower. However, these bank records, which we subpoenaed just this morning, prove that the penthouse was actually held by a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. That corporation was technically bankrupt at the time because of a failed hotel development in Miami, a project you conveniently forgot to mention on your disclosure forms. Silas Thorne was flipping through the pages, sweat beading on his forehead. Objection. This is not relevant. The relevance, Julian said, his voice becoming hard as steel, is that Mr. Vance committed fraud to persuade my client to sign that agreement. He desperately needed her to think he was financially stable. He was not. He was already drowning in debt back then. But here's the interesting part, Your Honor. Julian leaned forward, fixing his gaze on Marcus. Since Mr. Vance engaged in fraud, we have every right to void the prenup. But we are not going to. We are choosing to enforce the penalty clause instead. Article 9. It states that if one party is discovered to have concealed debts of more than $100,000, they must forfeit 50% of their marital asset appreciation to the other spouse as a penalty. Julian paused to let the words sink in. Mr. Vance's company has increased in value significantly over the last 3 years, mainly because of the major city stadium contract he just secured. A contract, I might add, that he won using designs that we intend to prove were heavily based on my client's unacknowledged work. She is a librarian, Marcus shrieked, completely losing his composure. She does not know the first thing about architecture. Erin rose to her feet. She did not need Julian's help for this part. She stared directly into Marcus's eyes. Who was it that corrected the load-bearing calculations for the West Wing proposal? Marcus? She asked in a quiet voice. Who was it that suggested using cross-laminated timber to reduce the carbon footprint, which was the sole reason the city council approved your bid in the first place? You were drunk on expensive scotch that night. I sat down at your computer and I fixed your disaster. Marcus's mouth fell open, but nothing came out. He remembered. He remembered waking up to find the work finished, and he had just assumed he had done it himself during a drunken blackout. He never questioned it. He simply took all the credit. We are moving to freeze all of Mr. Vance's assets while we conduct an audit of his actual financial situation, Julian finished, and we are suing for 50% of Vance Architecture in addition to all legal fees. And since my hourly rate is considerably higher than Mr. Thorne's, that is going to be a very substantial bill. Judge Conincade reviewed the evidence. She looked over at Marcus, who was now physically shaking. Motion to dismiss is denied, the judge ruled, bringing her gavel down with a sharp crack. A temporary restraining order on all assets of Vance Architecture is granted. Mr. Vance, you are ordered to give Mr. Vanderquilt's forensic accountants complete access to your financial records by 5 p.m. today. 5 p.m.? Silas squeaked. Your Honor, that is only 6 hours from now. Then I suggest you start making copies, the judge replied dryly. Court is adjourned. Leaving the courthouse felt like running a gauntlet. The media had already caught on to the Vanderquilt name. Camera flashes went off everywhere. Reporters shouted questions. Erin, is it true that you are the Vanderquilt heiress? Marcus, were you aware that your wife was a billionaire? Mr. Vanderquilt, are there any plans to buy the Seahawks? Julian's security team cleared a path through the reporters like a bulldozer. Marcus, however, was completely surrounded. He shoved his way through a wall of microphones, his face a picture of pure panic, with Lydia following close behind, looking as though she might be sick. Marcus, what is going on? Lydia hissed as they finally managed to get into his Mercedes. Is she really going to get half of the company? Just shut up, Lydia. Marcus slammed his fist on the steering wheel. She is getting nothing. This is all some kind of trick. It is nothing but smoke and mirrors. I am the architect here. I am the one with the talent. They have nothing on me, but his hands were trembling so violently that he could not even fit the key into the ignition. He drove like a madman back to the Vance Architecture headquarters on Fifth Avenue. He had to shred paperwork. He had to delete the emails about the failed Miami project. He had to move the money from his offshore accounts before the asset freeze went into effect. He burst through the doors into his firm's lobby, expecting to find the usual busy atmosphere, with receptionists greeting him and interns rushing around with coffee. Instead, the lobby was completely silent. In the middle of the room stood 4 individuals dressed in dark business suits with identification badges. They were busy packing files into boxes. "What is going on here?" Marcus bellowed, pushing past the receptionist's desk. "Who are all of you?" A woman with short gray hair stepped toward him. "Mr. Vance, my name is Agent Miller with the Forensic Audit Division. We are here acting on behalf of the court-appointed receiver." "Receiver? I am the owner of this company." "Building." "That is no longer the case, sir," Agent Miller stated calmly. "The bank is calling in your loans, specifically the commercial mortgage on this property and your line of credit for payroll. A bank cannot do that without 30 days' notice. They can if a borrower's financial status undergoes a material adverse change," the agent countered. "The asset freeze, ordered by Judge Kincaid 1 hour ago, qualifies as such a change. Seattle First Bank is exercising its right to demand immediate repayment." Marcus stood frozen. Seattle First Bank. The memory of Julian's voice echoed in his head. This afternoon, Vanderquilt Industries acquired Seattle First Bank. He had walked straight into a trap. Julian did not just file a lawsuit against him. He bought the very ground Marcus was standing on and was now ripping it out from underneath him. Marcus. He turned to see David, his chief financial officer, emerging from his office, holding a box of personal belongings. David's face was pale. "David, tell them we have the cash reserves." "We do not, Marcus," David said, refusing to look at him. "You spent our reserves on the new renovations for the penthouse and the engagement ring for Miss Cross." Lydia, who had just entered the room, stopped in her tracks. All eyes went to the enormous diamond on her hand. In that moment, it no longer looked like a token of love. It looked like a piece of stolen evidence. "I am resigning, Marcus," David said softly. "I cannot be involved in a fraud investigation. I have a family." "You coward," Marcus yelled. "I am the one who made you. You used us," David corrected him before walking out the door. Marcus rushed toward his office. But the door was locked. A security guard, undoubtedly one of the new ones Julian had arranged for, stood in his way. "Access is denied, Mr. Vance. This is my office." "Not until the audit is finished, sir. Please escort yourself from the premises, or we will be forced to assist you." Marcus stepped back, his chest tight. He scanned the open plan office. His employees, the architects, designers, and engineers were all staring at him. He saw no loyalty in their faces, only second-hand embarrassment. They already knew. They must have seen the news. They knew their boss had thrown out his wife, only to discover she could buy and sell him 10 times over. He looked toward Lydia. She was by the elevator, typing furiously on her phone. "Lydia, let us go. We can go to the lake house. We will sort this out." Lydia glanced up at him. Her entire demeanor had shifted. The wide-eyed admiration she once had was gone, replaced by a cold calculation that was a mirror image of his own. "The lake house?" she questioned. The one you claimed was in your name? Or does that also belong to a shell company? It is complicated, but we are a team, right? We are having a son. Lydia glanced down at her belly, then back up at him. I require security, Marcus. You promised me a life of luxury. You promised there would be no drama. This, she said, motioning toward the federal agents and the packing boxes. This is not luxury. This is a felony. I am the victim in all of this, Marcus pleaded. She deceived me. She acted like she was poor, and you acted like you were rich. Lydia replied coldly. The elevator chimed. I am going to stay with my sister. Do not contact me until you have fixed this. Lydia, you are carrying my heir. She walked into the elevator. I am carrying a liability. The doors slid shut. Marcus was left alone in the lobby of an empire he had constructed with lies. The phone on the reception desk began to ring. It was a journalist. Then a second line rang, and then a third. He stumbled toward the exit and out onto the street. He pulled out his phone to call Silas, but the screen lit up with a notification. It was a new email from Vanderquilt Industries. The subject line read, Settlement Offer. With trembling hands, Marcus opened it. Mr. Vance, we are prepared to drop the fraud charges and halt the pursuit of your personal bankruptcy if you agree to the following terms. 1. You must sign the uncontested divorce papers without delay. 2. You must publicly state that the design for the city stadium was primarily the work of Aaron Vanderquilt. 3. You must resign as Chief Executive Officer of Vance Architecture and transfer your controlling shares to Aaron Vanderquilt for the price of $1. You have 1 hour to comply. Julian Vanderquilt, Marcus stared at his phone. $1. They were offering to buy his entire life's work for just $1. He looked toward the sky. The rain was starting again. Marcus was sitting in the conference room of the law firm that once represented him. Silas Thorne had recused himself an hour before, claiming a conflict of interest as soon as Julian's legal team began sending malpractice threats. Marcus was by himself. His 1 hour deadline had passed. The door swung open. It was not a group of lawyers this time. It was only Aaron and Julian. Aaron strode to the head of the table. She laid a single, crisp document on the polished mahogany. Next to it, she placed a pen. Marcus looked up at them. His eyes were red and swollen. His tie was loose. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He looked a decade older than he had that same morning. Aaron, he said, his voice a dry rasp, we can find a solution. Please, you loved me at one time. Aaron gazed at him, her face impossible to read. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was pity. That expression hurt Marcus more than any shouting ever could have. I loved the man I believed you to be, Marcus, she said gently. I loved the man who said he wanted to create things that would last. But you do not build things, you only take them. I was feeling the pressure, Marcus begged, getting to his feet with shaking hands. The market was in a downturn. I had to secure the stadium deal to keep us afloat. I did it for the both of us. Do not, Julian interjected, his voice sharp as a whip. He stayed by the door like a silent guard. Do not insult her intelligence. You did it for your own ego. You did it so you could get a bigger boat and replace your wife with a younger version. Marcus sank back into his chair. If I sign this, I will have nothing. My reputation will be ruined. I will never be able to work in this city again. Your reputation is already ruined, Aaron stated. The news cycle is very fast, Marcus. The Vance fraud story is already trending on social media. The American Institute of Architects has suspended your license while they investigate. It is all over. She tapped the document. This is an act of mercy, Marcus. If you sign this, Julian will call off his forensic accountants. You will stay out of prison for bank fraud. You get to walk away a free man, a broke man, but a free one. Marcus looked at the paper. Transfer of ownership. Consideration, $1. And what about Lydia? Marcus whispered. Lydia contacted my office 20 minutes ago, Julian said, glancing at his watch. She is making a deal. She is offering information about your offshore accounts in return for immunity. She is not coming back to you, Marcus. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. Marcus Vance, the man who dreamed of being a king, reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so badly that the ink bled onto the page. He signed his name. He slid the document across the table to Erin. Erin reached into her own pocket. She took out a single, crumpled dollar bill. It was old and soft from being handled so much. Here, she said, pushing it over to him. Marcus stared down at the bill. George Washington stared back up at him. Take it, Erin ordered. Marcus reached out and picked up the dollar. It felt like it was burning his hand. Get out, Julian said. Marcus rose to his feet. He walked to the door, his steps feeling heavy as lead. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob, looking back at the woman he had so badly misjudged. What will you do with the company? He asked, his voice empty. You are a librarian. You have no idea how to run an architecture firm. Erin smiled, a real radiant smile he had not seen in many years. I am not going to run it, Marcus. I am going to take it apart. And then I am going to build something real. Marcus stepped out into the hall. The elevator was there, waiting. He got inside, the doors closed, and he began his descent into obscurity. The alarm clock on the floor went off at 5:30 in the morning, a jarring metallic sound that rattled against the cheap linoleum. Marcus Vance swung his legs off the mattress, his back screaming in protest. There was no bed frame, just a box spring on the floor of a studio apartment in Renton, a world away from the glittering skyscrapers of downtown Seattle. The room smelled of old instant coffee and the damp, earthy odor of the Pacific Northwest that always seemed to find its way through the single-pane window. Marcus rubbed his face, the stubble scratching his palm. He had not shaved in 3 days. Razor blades were a luxury, and on a construction worker's salary, you learned how to make everything last. He got dressed in the dim light, pulling on heavy work pants that were stiff, with dried drywall mud, a worn-out flannel shirt, and steel-toed boots that cramped his feet. He did not put on an Italian suit. He did not fasten a Rolex to his wrist. He checked his pockets for his keys, a bus pass, and a folded $1 bill he kept tucked away in the deepest part of his wallet. He drank his coffee, black, while standing over the sink, looking at his reflection in the tarnished mirror. The arrogance that once filled his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, unending exhaustion. Today was a Tuesday, but it was not just any other Tuesday. Marcus had to take 2 different buses to get downtown. He sat near the back, pulling his hat down low, trying not to make eye contact with the other commuters staring at their phones. He was once the man in the back of a black car, reading emails on a tablet and getting irritated by the traffic. Now he was part of that traffic. He got off the bus at 4th and Pike and then walked for 6 blocks. He should not have come here. He knew it was a form of self-punishment, but he could not resist. The construction site that had been the start of his downfall was now complete. 6 months prior, this very block was slated to become the Vance Millennium Tower, a towering tribute to his own ego, a sharp needle of glass aimed at the heavens. He had gambled his marriage, his morals, and his very soul to make it happen. Now, as he stood on the other side of the street, shivering in his coat against the sharp autumn wind, he saw what had taken its place. The new building was shorter, with a warmer feel. The harsh, aggressive lines of his original concept had been softened. The exterior was not cold steel. It was a mixture of reclaimed wood and living green walls that seemed to be alive with the city model. A huge banner stretched between two old oak trees announcing the grand opening of the Aaron Vance Community Center and Public Library. He felt his stomach drop. She had kept his name, not out of any respect for him, but as a final, cutting reminder. She had taken his brand, one he had carefully built to represent luxury and exclusivity, and turned it into a symbol for charity and public good. She had redefined his entire legacy without his permission. A crowd was forming. It was not the wealthy elite he used to entertain, but real people. There were students with heavy backpacks, elderly couples holding hands, and young mothers guiding strollers. A wave of real excitement filled the air, the kind of authentic buzz Marcus could never create, no matter how much he paid his public relations firms. And then he saw her. Aaron stepped out onto the raised plaza. For a moment, Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. She looked different. It was not just the expensive cream cashmere coat she wore, although it was clearly designer. She looked free. The deep tension she always held in her shoulders when they were married was gone. Her hair was down, blowing freely in the wind. She was laughing at something the man beside her had said. Marcus squinted to see him better. The man was tall and wore a tweed jacket and glasses. He was not a shark, like Julian. He looked like a professor, or maybe a writer. He had a gentle face. He placed a hand on the small of Aaron's back, a gesture so casual and intimate it felt like a physical blow to Marcus. A voice boomed over the speakers. It was the mayor. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new chapter for Seattle." Marcus watched the ceremony begin, feeling like a ghost at his own funeral. He listened as the mayor celebrated the vision of a woman who understood that shelter was about more than walls. It was about community. Then Erin approached the microphone. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady and clear, amplified across the plaza, echoing off the glass buildings that surrounded them. "A year ago, I was told that I did not fit into this city's future. I was told that worth is measured by what you can take." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. For a terrifying second, Marcus was sure she saw him. He shrank back behind a street lamp. "But I learned that worth is measured by what you can give," Erin continued, her hand resting almost unconsciously on her stomach. She was just beginning to show, a small curve visible under the cashmere. Marcus gripped the cold metal of the lamppost. A baby. Lydia had ended her pregnancy a week after his scandal broke, refusing to be tied to a broke outcast. She had moved to Los Angeles to find a producer. But Erin was building a family. "This building," Erin said, gesturing to the center behind her, "was built on the ruins of a mistake. We tore down an ego to build a foundation for everyone. This library is for the student who needs a quiet place to dream. This legal aid clinic is for the partner who needs a way out of a bad situation. This is for you." The applause was deafening. It was not polite clapping. It was a roar of genuine approval. Marcus felt a tear slide down his cheek. It was cold and angry. He wiped it away furiously. He had built skyscrapers. He had won awards. But no one had ever looked at him the way that crowd looked at her. "She is amazing, is not she?" Marcus jumped. A woman standing next to him, holding a bag of groceries, was smiling at the stage. "I used to know her," Marcus muttered, his voice raspy. "You are lucky," the woman said. "She saved this neighborhood. That developer, Vance, the one who tried to bulldoze the community garden. I heard he is in jail or something. Good riddance." Marcus pulled his collar up. "Yeah, good riddance." On the stage, the ribbon cutting was about to begin. Julian Vanderquilt stepped forward. He looked as formidable as ever, but there was a new softness in his eyes as he looked at his sister. He handed her the scissors. Aaron cut the ribbon. A band struck up a jazz tune. Confetti, which was biodegradable and made from recycled leaves, rained down. Marcus turned away. He could not watch the joy anymore. It was too bright, and he was too dark. He walked down the street, his boots heavy on the pavement. He passed a high-end furniture store, the kind he used to shop in with Lydia. He saw his reflection in the window, a tired, middle-aged laborer with nothing to his name but a bad back and a story no one would believe. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the $1 bill. He smoothed it out against the glass of the shop window. Transfer of ownership. Consideration $1. It was not just the price of his company. It was the price of his arrogance. It was the value Aaron had placed on his threats, his power, and his bullying. He realized then that he had not just lost his money. He had been erased. Aaron had not destroyed him out of spite. She had simply outgrown him. She had turned his malice into mulch and grown a garden over it. "Spare change?" a homeless man asked. He sat on a crate near the corner, shaking a paper cup. Marcus looked at the man. He looked at the dollar bill in his hand. It was his last dollar until payday on Friday. He needed it for a sandwich, but the weight of it in his pocket felt like lead. It was a cursed object, a token of his failure. "Here," Marcus said. He dropped the dollar into the cup. "Bless you, sir," the man said. "Do not," Marcus replied grimly. "It is not worth anything." He walked toward the bus stop, blending into the gray wash of the city, disappearing into the background of the world he once thought he owned. Back on the plaza, the crowd was dispersing, filtering into the warm, well-lit lobby of the new center. Julian walked up to Aaron, handing her a bottle of water. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his eyes scanning the perimeter. Security said they spotted a male matching his description on the southeast corner. 4th and Pike. Aaron took a sip of water. She looked toward the corner where the bus stop was. She saw the empty street. "I know," she said. "I felt him." "Do you want me to have him removed? I can have a restraining order filed by lunch." Aaron shook her head, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. She turned to look at Liam, who was currently showing a group of children the entrance to the children's reading room. "No, Julian," she said. "Let him watch. Let him see what real power looks like." Besides, she placed a hand on her brother's arm. "He is in a prison of his own making. The walls are made of regret, and there is no parole for that." Julian nodded slowly. "You are too good for him. You always were, even when you were hiding in that library." "I was not hiding," Aaron corrected him, linking her arm through his. "I was reading, and I learned that every villain is just a hero who forgot how to love." "Well," Julian smirked, buttoning his suit jacket, "this villain is hungry, and since you are the philanthropist of the year, you are buying lunch." Aaron laughed, a sound that rang clear and true, unburdened by the past. "Deal. But we are going to that taco truck on 3rd. I am craving spicy tacos." The billionaire chief executive officer raised an eyebrow. "I was thinking Liagos, Julian. It is a democracy now." They walked down the steps of the community center together. The brother who had brought the thunder and the sister who had brought the rain, leaving the glass castle shattered behind them to build something that would finally actually last. Aaron's journey from a silenced wife to a powerhouse of justice serves as a brutal reminder. Never mistake silence for submission. Marcus Vance thought he held all the cards because he had the loud voice and the flashy job. He failed to realize that true power does not need to shout. It waits. In the end, the glass castle Marcus built shattered because it had no foundation of truth. He lost, not because Aaron had a wealthy brother, but because he underestimated the character of the woman he slept beside every night. He chased the appearance of success and lost the reality of love. Erin did not just take his money, she took his narrative. She turned a symbol of corporate greed into a sanctuary for the community, proving that the best revenge is not just destroying your enemy, it is succeeding in a way they never could. She walked away with everything, not because she was a Vanderquilt, but because she was finally herself. If you cheered when Julian walked into that courtroom, or if you felt the power when Erin handed Marcus that single-dollar bill, hit that like button right now. It helps us share more stories of justice and triumph. What would you have done if you were Erin? Would you have taken the company, or would you have sent Marcus to jail? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. And do not forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next part of our betrayal and revenge saga. Until next time, remember the truth always wins. This content was carefully researched, crafted, and edited by hand to bring you meaningful lessons and inspiration. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.